Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and today we're actually talking about vaccine passports because they are evolving into digital IDs, and obviously there are some privacy issues associated with this that we really need to discuss. Now, a couple of people are talking about this, but I'm cribbing primarily from Cyberscoop, and here's what's going on. Tech companies and global organizations have been championing I can't speak today, health passes, sometimes known as vaccine passports, as a means to securely reopen businesses and borders as COVID-19 cases drop as the vaccination rate rises. Now, the technology is meant to serve as a secure way to prove that you have a vaccination without you needing to present a physical vaccine card or other documentation. For example, instead of checking a customer's vaccine card, a business or airline could simply scan a QR code off of your phone that would provide a verification based on uploaded medical records. Now, the European Union, Israel, Japan, and Singapore have all embraced vaccine passports to some extent to help open their borders. And here in the United States, several states, including New York and California, are embracing or have embraced verification technology. However, there's also a growing number of states, including Arizona, Florida, and Georgia, that are banning this or having basically governors sign executive orders in those states to ban those passports or now soon to be digital IDs. Now, some opponents of the technology have raised concerns that vaccine passports are an unnecessary replacement to paper and could disadvantage individuals without access to smartphones. That's actually a pretty interesting point. And others have accused companies such as IBM and Clear of being basically scant on details of how they're actually protecting the data that you're uploading into their systems for digital vaccine passports. Now, data protection experts basically have a new concern, and that is the greater expansion of the technology to include other forms of digital identities that will outlast the pandemic. So-called digital IDs, which is basically a broad term for app-based tools that authenticate your user identity in real time using things like biometrics, existing identification forms like driver's licenses, are emerging as a means of securely verifying user identities without essentially having to give out a whole bunch of information. So, privacy experts are worrying, though, that without appropriate safeguards and protections, this technology could end up putting your data at risk. And I think that's a very valid concern. Now, IBM is working with New York State to expand the Excelsior Pass. And if you're in New York State, you know what I'm talking about here. This is essentially your vaccine passport, but they're basically expanding that to include not just your vaccine status, but also your age, driver's license, other personal records. And this is according to the government contract obtained by these surveillance technology oversight product and first reported by the New York Times. IBM, though, isn't alone. Clear, the maker basically behind Health Pass, was launched as a biometric identification system to get through airport security more quickly. I've been through multiple airports where I see clear lines, and quite frankly, I'm always a little jealous that they never had one here at O'Hare. Now, Apple, which does not have a health pass, also recently introduced technology that will allow users to upload and present digital driver's licenses in some states, according to the Transportation Security Administration as well. Now, digital IDs could also act as a real-time relay between the government and an authenticator to prove that a person is who they say they are without revealing sensitive data by having to write it down or actually just show it like a social security number. These IDs, in theory, could then go a long way to preventing identity fraud because you're actually not giving away those important numbers like a social security. They could also potentially cut down on the overexposure of personal information. So, for example, you could virtually sign a mortgage without having to expose a social security number on the actual signing documents that are saved and faxed everywhere and possibly intercepted. Instead of the huge amounts of paper identification that would be required for recipients of things like social welfare programs, participants could use a one-time verification credential in a similar manner. Now, during the pandemic, the need to verify identity without having to physically interact has become clearer, according to Jeremy Grant, the coordinator for the Better Identity Coalition. This is a group that is pushing for a new digital ID policy in the United States. Its members include Yubico, maker of the YubiKey, Discover, the credit card company, Equifax, what is that? They have your credit information, and Microsoft, we all know Microsoft, among other major companies as well. But privacy experts have expressed concerns that in absence of federal guidance or regulation, these tech companies could simply use the pandemic to gain a foothold for versions of digital identification technology that fail to safeguard your privacy. Some of these concerns could be allayed by adhering to standards basically set by existing open standards bodies that dictate security standards and make sure technology is essentially interoperable. So several organizations already exist in this realm, including W3C's verified credential standard, which is used in IBM's Health Pass. Credentials from open standard bodies that are developed in a way, in this way that are collaborative and transparent, which then makes it easier for researchers and users to evaluate the technology behind the product. The Biden administration has previously said that while it would not mandate a national vaccine passport, it would help provide guidelines to the industry to help ensure better privacy practices. The Department of Homeland Security is also exploring security standards for digital driver's licenses to update rules basically for the Real ID Act. We have that here in Illinois. If your driver's license has Real ID you can basically use it in airports. If you don't have the Real ID on your Illinois driver's license, it is not valid to get in or pass the TSA in an airport. Now, without more transparency and guidance, it's difficult to assess not just what a company is doing with the data, but how well they're securing it. And I think this was actually a rather well-written article on this, and there's a couple of different facets to this. The first one is the actual politics of this. If you look at the states that are basically shutting down or banning Real IDs, these are states that tend to have populations that are more reticent to take the vaccine than, let's say, in New York or California, where the vaccination rates per capita are much higher. And I'm not actually getting into that. What you believe regarding the vaccine, whether you should take it or not, I think is your business. I am not discussing or adjudicating that here. I am discussing two different things. And one, that is a vaccine passport that is digital that eventually merges and morphs into a digital identity. And I think in that sense, that is a long time coming. I think the United States and other countries, as we have adopted technology and we have our smartphones essentially glued to us, I think that's pretty inevitable in that sense. So the biggest question becomes, how do we actually secure this? How do we make sure that this is private? Now, there is a pretty large libertarian streak here in the United States when it comes to this. We don't actually have a national ID standard, especially, that might be news to you, especially if you're not an American citizen and you're sitting here watching or listening to this. We can get passports, but not everybody in the country has passports. In fact, I think it's something like only 30% of us have passports or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but that's where we're at. So we don't have an actual government ID beyond, let's say, what is issued by our state. So there are 50 different state IDs because we have 50 different states, not to mention Washington, D.C., and I think that's an important thing. We have been pretty much against centralizing a national ID system here in the United States, and that streak has carried through the technological age, and this is concerning. Now, it would make sense from a standpoint of an IBM or a Clear who is in this business to want to be that national ID standard, and this is where they're aggressively going with this, but they're not being transparent on this in the sense of beyond what they're saying that, oh, well, we don't actually read your data or it's secured or it's encrypted without understanding at a really deep level those standards. I think that's a really important thing that nobody is discussing. Also, the Biden administration just put on an executive order talking about software grading to make sure that software is secure, it is adhering to standards like encryption and identity management and all of that. This would have to go through that as well. I would be myself reticent to give my information out to an organization, especially if it's the information that could be used against me for something like an identity theft scam, to a company if I don't understand their security controls. And I think that's a huge thing as well. Also, the other side of this as well that I'm not going to get into is the stigma of this. There are a lot of people that don't have the vaccine, that refuse to get the vaccine, and they believe that either a physical or a digital passport in some way, shape, or form, and I think the word passport is a bad thing as well because the connotation there is identity, but those people believe they have a stigma against them by virtue of, let's say, a recent concert by the Foo Fighters where you had to show proof of vaccination. If you couldn't get in. And I think that's another topic that we have to discuss, but not here. I am talking purely about the technology that we are discussing here. So With that, those are your options. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this. This is coming. I think we are going to see, I predict we're going to see a long battle here in the United States over digital IDs, where we're going to see pockets of states, along the political divide basically rally against it or try to adopt it. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, but that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.